passion of mine is college football, particularly related to Clemson football. As an alumnus of the school, I've been going and watching Clemson games my entire life. If you don't know about Clemson, that's okay. It is a smaller school. It's a public school in South Carolina. They're orange. They're coached by a very perplexing and interesting human being named Dabo Swinney. I would highly encourage you to just Google his name and see what comes up. It will be something interesting. He is quite the character. Clemson has been extremely successful under Dabo Swinney since his interim hiring in 2009. Clemson was just recently selected to be the last participant in the college football playoff in its inaugural 12-team version. Clemson will be heading to Austin, Texas to play Texas, who at many points throughout the year was the number one team in the country, on December 21st at 4 p.m. As someone who watches Clemson games extremely closely, as someone who is very interested in the sport, I figured, what the heck, why not share my thoughts on how this game is going to go, all the keys of the game I think that exist, some interesting sort of storylines that are at play, and overall what I think is most likely to take place. I've been watching a lot of the teams' condensed game tapes or highlights that ESPN or Fox Sports or any of these folks put out onto YouTube. And I've watched a lot of Texas games throughout the year, particularly when Arch Manning took over. If you're not familiar with Arch Manning, it is, of course, related to Peyton Eli Manning. He is their nephew. He is a tremendous talent who is the backup quarterback at Texas. And at some point this year, due to injuries to the starting quarterback, Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning came in, and he was electric. Had some mistakes, but incredibly entertaining. Has a different energy, certainly, than the older Manning seemed to have. Carries himself with a bit of swagger, loves to run. A very, very interesting player. I think you will see him in the game. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So here's what we know about Clemson's defense at this point in the year. Under Wes Goodwin, who is in his, I believe, third year as the defensive coordinator, Clemson has taken a little bit of a step backward from a defensive standpoint. I'll post a lot of these numbers either in the description or somewhere online, but just thinking about some off the top of my head, Clemson's run defense has fallen way off where it used to be. Under Brent Venables, it would be, from a yardage standpoint, top 10 in the country for a majority of his tenure, and this year, at least around the Pitt game, it was around 86th in the country. Clemson is giving up yards on the ground in ways they never have before, at least not in the last 10 to 12 years. Hi, editing me here. Just thought I would pop in and catch up on the numbers from the Pitt game to now. This is through December 7th. I'll post this up on the screen, so it should be pretty easy to see. Feel free to take your own judgments about Wes Goodwin and the state of Clemson's defense, but just try to get my point across that Clemson has taken a step backwards. They're particularly vulnerable on the ground. As you can see here, 76th in the country in yards per rush. Particularly vulnerable in explosive plays of 10 and 20 plus yards. In general, points per game, especially against winning teams, yards per play given up against winning teams, they're not where they used to be, plain and simple. There's a lot of reasons for this, I would argue. Most of them are schematic, and I think are potentially also avoidable. And we've seen Clemson figure out a way to deal with it. For example, when they went to Virginia Tech earlier in the year and played a team that had a tremendous running ability, that's really all VT had to offer, Clemson said, you know what we'll do? We'll bring out Sammy Brown, who is the 5-star freshman linebacker, and they'll say, instead of playing 2 linebackers like they normally do, let's play 3, and let's say, hey, beat us on the ground, you win the game. And VT couldn't run the ball, couldn't get anything going. The simple answer is that Clemson figured out that Sammy Brown was ready, whereas maybe in the beginning of the year's not, if you're giving the coaching staff credit, and he's been a tremendous force for Clemson's defense the past few weeks. That's why it was baffling and insane that after leading the team in tackles and tackles for loss against South Carolina, he's pulled from the game in the fourth quarter, only playing, I believe, like 2 or 3 snaps. The coaches gave a pretty decent explanation, thinking that South Carolina would go to the air, and therefore they didn't need to have another linebacker on the field. But you have to wonder if the game would have gone differently if Sammy Brown would have stayed out there. The reason I bring this all up is Arch Manning provides a different skill set than Quinn Ewers does. Texas has developed a decent running game. They run a lot of counter. They run a lot of sweep. What they really love to do is get into a bunch and have the slot receiver and the tight end sort of mix match. So the slot receiver bangs down inside and crashes, and he holds and sets the edge, and then the tight end motions out before the play starts. It's a cool looking look. It's Sark, being Steve Sarkisian, Texas head coach, doing interesting stuff. He's very talented. And then that tight end will then lead block, and it creates this really nice sweep motion. They love to run fake end-arounds off of it. They love actual end-arounds, so their freshman wide receiver is very fast, Ryan Wingo. They'll even run like deep play action off of it too. What I would like to call this, and I don't know, there's probably smarter people than me that talked about it, I would call Steve Sarkisian's offense almost like a cradle offense. And you may be saying, what do you mean by cradle offense? I mean, if you were to rock a baby from side to side, Sark loves to get your linebackers looking from left to right. There's a ton of swinging. And what that does is, one, if you don't get out there, you got huge problems. They love a swing pass outside. They love a sweep. And then they love to counter the other way with that sweep. Or they love to get you running one way and then hit you with an end around to Wingo, and he's going to go off way the other way. And it gets you swinging. And then if you start selling out, trying to split your linebackers to the left and the right, they'll attack you so hard up the seams. They love a little, like an over route, kind of maybe more like a Dover route to their wide receivers. Golden in particular eats in the middle of the field. The reason I started with Arch Manning, though, is what was interesting in Texas' last game, which was a loss to Georgia. There are only 2 losses on the year have been to Georgia in the SEC championship game. Texas' offense was solid, but it lacked something when Quinn Ewers was in the game, particularly because they kept giving up negative plays. The offensive line could not handle Georgia's front. Now, as a Clemson fan, I can tell you that it's really hard to handle Georgia's front. Putting in Arch Manning may have alleviated that because he can move. He can move. And I wouldn't be surprised, after Clemson struggled tremendously with running quarterbacks in Lenora Sellers of South Carolina and then Kevin Jennings of SMU, that Sark has more of a lean to put in Arch Manning into the game. I was surprised that he did not do it against Georgia. It didn't work the first time he tried, to be fair. But it seems like a matchup that would favor having a guy that can really take off. And they play teams that don't offer that. Suddenly things are much easier for them. I think for the fun of it, the best way to look at it is, what will Clemson need to do to beat Texas? Right now, Texas seems to be favored around 11.5, 12 points. So I think most people are going to suggest that Texas wins. I would say that's right. They have more ways to win. So instead, let's look at how Texas has lost to Georgia twice and what Clemson can do and what they can't do that maybe gives them a shot in this game, because I do think they have one. So, imperative number 1, you got to get after Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning, who's ever in the game. You have to get after him, and you got to get after him really fast, really aggressively. Georgia is unrelenting with their pass rush. Exotic looks. Sometimes they're bringing Everett as a corner, and he looks like he's playing man, and he blitzes off. They got a huge strip sack in the first game because of that against Texas. You have to have a killer pass rush. Clemson was supposed to be a top 5 defensive line in the country from the preseason. Brought back a tremendous amount of talent. Rumblings that TJ Parker could be a first-rounder one day. Peter Wood's almost certain to be a first-rounder. Demonte Capehart is flying up boards. So now you've got 3 of the 4 that are maybe going to be first-round draft picks at some point in their careers. And Peyton Page is going to be, at minimum, an NFL practice squad guy, but could be a 3rd or 4th-round guy depending on how he does, kind of at the Senior Bowl or something like that. They got dudes. They lack a little bit of depth, but they got dudes. The problem was, through the Pitt game, they were around 60th in the country in sacks, creating a lot of pressure, for sure, but weren't getting a tremendous amount of sacks, and that did change. Clemson's defensive line really got after Pitt. They got after South Carolina. They got after SMU, and in those games, it was much more effective. They seemed to have taken a large step forward. The problem was against South Carolina and SMU is sometimes the quarterbacks would escape anyway. Particularly quarterback draw and design quarterback runs has been deadly against Clemson. Absolutely killer. And I think Sark is, considering his prestige, he's going to watch Clemson's tape from last month and go, oh man, they're so vulnerable with quarterback run. Imperative number 1 is got to be, you got to rattle Quinn Ewers, and you got to be unrelenting all night, regardless of who's in the game. And I give Clemson a decent shot at this. The defensive line has been the best it's looked all year in the last month. Seems to be one, getting healthy, finding some depth. Guys like Jaheim Lawson have been a huge improvement point. Stephon Green has taken a huge step forward. It's provided them to be 6-7 deep instead of just 5. And it's gone a long way. They have to have their best game of the season. It's the way that Georgia was able to win their games. It's not just dominating the run, and we'll talk about the run next. They, rattled Quinn Ewers at times, but they didn't allow any comfort in the passing game. Now in the second matchup, Texas had a little bit more success, but as the game wore on, Georgia caused so many negative plays that suddenly it's 3rd and 10 plus often, and that will lend itself to Clemson. Clemson is a pretty great pass defense. They've struggled against the run. We'll talk about that next. But they force turnovers, and so if Clemson gets you into 3rd and long, you're in danger, and they'll have to be super effective on first down, particularly with first down passing that Texas wants to do. They'll have to get after Quinn Ewers. Something that stands out to me after watching lots of Texas tape is that cradle offense is going to stretch you, and if you're not careful, you'll get busted pretty fast. Gunnar Helm is a tremendous tight end. They love to slip him up the seam. They love misdirection. Sark's got you looking everywhere, especially left to right. He's got you looking all over the place. They have tremendous speed at wide receiver, and Gold and Bond, Wingo. They're fast. And the last time we've seen Clemson play an offense with that speed, which is Georgia, Clemson couldn't keep up speed-wise. So imperative number 2 is if you can't keep up, which I'm a little bit optimistic now with the season before them, and adding Sammy Brown into the team, I feel a little bit better about their speed. But Texas is just as fast as Georgia out wide, and maybe faster. If you can't keep up, you got to keep them in front of you, and that can be hard for West Goodwin in his defense because he loves to play a lot of man. And so he's asking his guys to really handle players that caliber, and sometimes I don't know if that's the right format. Putting a guy like a Wade Woodaz, who's a tremendous linebacker, but he plays at 230, 240 pounds, and asking him to try and play a slot guy for a second before he passes him off, it's a big ask at times, what West Goodwin asks of his linebackers. So imperative 2 is no major bust on the back end. Clemson's going to give up a couple, for sure, but can you turn that 6-yard touchdown into just 30, 40-yard plays, and let's see what we can do in the red zone? It's imperative to not give up the really long touchdown, which I think is super available. Texas is quite good at being explosive. Something I forgot to mention with the run game, I promise I'd talk about the run game. Clemson has struggled at times with contain and gap assignment. West Goodwin talks about gap assignment all the time, and you would think if they talk about it so much, it would suddenly be a thing they've fixed. But for 3 years, it's been a lot of conversation about we struggled with gap assignment with the easy stuff tonight. Part of this is the defensive ends and T.J. Parker, and now recently Cade Denhoff as a starter. But even when Jaheim Lawson comes in, they've done a much improved job the last month of getting after the passer. But when it comes to setting the edge in the run game, they're having what appears to me is, from layman's eyes, is a really hard time in setting the edge. In conjunction, when an offense like Texas's gets your linebackers moving all over the place, doesn't allow them to attack downhill in great ways. And equally, when Clemson likes to play a 4-2-5 and bring another safety or a nickel corner, someone like a Shelton Lewis or a Kylan Griffin into the game, they lack some physicality up front and their linebackers' ability to fly downhill. That's why it's so obvious when Sammy Brown comes into the game, because now Barrett Carter, who normally is this sort of central roaming linebacker, it allows him to play the more speedy slot guy. He's super kind of Swiss Army knife. And then you can allow Wade Woodaz to be up towards the line of scrimmage. They had to play him in space as well, but put him up towards the line of scrimmage, and then Sammy Brown can just fly the direction towards the ball and make plays. And that's what we see take place. What Texas loves to do is misdirect, even in their run game. So outside of just stopping busts from taking place, Clemson has to be really careful with the misdirection in their linebackers and gap assignments. I don't mean to be overly pessimistic here. It's an issue they've had all year. I can't imagine why suddenly that gets fixed against Texas. But they have had bright spots. They've had bright spots in defending Rocket Sanders in South Carolina. They had bright spots in defending Brashard Smith of SMU for a while. And against Virginia Tech, they almost shut down that entire, read option run game. So there are moments where Clemson's defense is able to handle a run game, but it's not something that's been easy for them. Okay, let's talk about one that does seem very possible for Clemson. Clemson's like top 3 in the country in turnover margin. This is insane if you talk to any Clemson fan after last year being a tremendous problem with turnovers. Last year they lost the Duke game because of turnovers. They lost the Florida State game because of turnovers. Whether it was Klubnik and not recognizing blitzes, fumbles were everywhere for Maffa and for Klubnik. They had a really hard time with turnovers. And they weren't generating a tremendous amount, but not bad. This year, the defense is incredibly opportunistic. I got real gripes with the defense as someone who watches a lot of Clemson football very closely. But they are incredibly opportunistic. If there's something that West Goodland is very good at creating, it is aggressive defenders who will punch the ball out, who will go for a strip sack. And it works. It works. They generate turnovers a lot. And if you watch Texas play Georgia, and Quinn Ewers throughout the years, there are times where Quinn Ewers will throw several interceptions, right, where he'll get a little bit rattled. That's why that imperative number 1 of getting after him is really important. The last thing Clemson wants is Quinn Ewers to be really comfy. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be at home. You're going to have to go in and be extremely physical, maybe even overly so at the risk of getting a penalty. And I'm not advocating for like someone to do something really stupid and hurt somebody, but you've got to be willing to show up physically, so that Quinn Ewers maybe isn't that comfortable, not willing to take off. He seems to have had a bum ankle for weeks, so you have to ensure that he's going to sit back there, and you got to make him uncomfortable. Clemson's been terrific winning the turnover margin. That's why they beat SMU the other day. So it's critical that Clemson does that again. I do not foresee a game where if Clemson loses the turnover margin, they win the game. I'm willing to be surprised, but I would not bet your money on that. And so I guess this is imperative number 4. You need a difference maker at running back, and if you are a fan of Clemson, this is where you should be extremely worried. Extremely worried. Texas has a top 5 run defense. They have a top 1 pass defense in yardage in the country. They don't get beat deep. It's super hard to pick them apart. If you line up and say we're going to throw it every down, Texas is going to say, awesome, we're going to bring 4, and you're going to have nothing all night. Andrew Makuba, their starting safety, previously played at Clemson. Man, if you watch Texas film, he is just hawking the quarterback, and he makes early reads. In fact, I think he's actually very vulnerable to a pump fake. It's not something I see Cade Klubnik, Clemson's quarterback, do about ever. But if you were, I think you could get Makuba to move. You could get Texas safeties to move because they want to intercept the ball. They're super aggressive, and they're extremely good. Very fast. There's nothing there. Anthony Hill, in particular, a linebacker, is everywhere. He's everywhere. He and Makuba seem to make every tackle. If you watch how Georgia beat Texas, especially in the first game, but even in the second game, it's Trevor Etienne. And it's not just in the run game in its basic form, whether Georgia's running counter or they're running slam, whatever they're doing. There were times when Carson Beck would dump the ball off to Etienne, and he would turn a 3rd and 6 into a first down when it looked like he was not going to get the first down. Impressive stuff. Reminds me of his older brother and what he used to do when he would get the ball at Clemson. If you haven't been following Clemson's running back situation the past few weeks, Phil Maffa was one of the, top 10 to 15 returning running backs in the country. A super bruiser, runs extremely hard, big kid. Never known for breakaway speed, but he's going to run really hard, and it's going to turn 1-yard gains into 3-yard gains because of his physicality. And the last month, he has looked tremendously poor, and I feel pretty comfortable saying that. It seems to be a pretty commonplace opinion at this point. And he's gone over 1,000 yards on the year. He is a guy that will be remembered very fondly, I think, by a lot of Clemson fans. He's had a tremendously hard time, and there's been lots of rumblings for why that is, and now we finally know. We knew that Phil Maffa hurt his shoulder last year. It turns out in camp he tore his labrum and has been playing with a torn labrum all season. It doesn't seem to fully explain why he's kind of slowed up and why it's gotten worse. I guess just deterioration as the year has gone on. He looks to get out of bounds, and he runs laterally way more often than he did in August and September. And that is a tremendous problem because Phil Maffa is not an effective lateral runner. Some guys are, some guys aren't, and that's not Phil Maffa's strength, and that's okay. I don't think it's a real problem in saying that out loud. Clemson has had no success running the ball for weeks. 4 weeks, Clemson cannot run the ball. People are very quick to jump at the offensive line, which, in my view, if I'm putting a flag somewhere, it's the most improved unit on the team, is maybe the strongest consistent unit on the team. We're creating running lanes, not massive ones, even against UGA to open the year. They've been steady. They give Klubnik a tremendous amount of time, and they've played some really good defensive fronts. They've played Georgia. They've played Pitt. They played VT. They played Louisville. They played South Carolina. And now they played SMU. And they've handled those fronts. That's a death row of defensive fronts. They can handle them. Does that mean they'll give up a sack or two? For sure. Will Klubnik also then add one on top from trying to do too much? That's for sure possible. But are they doing enough to generate gaps in the run game and also be extremely protective of Klubnik? Yes. Clemson's offensive line under Matt Luke is, I can't express how much better they are. And we should give Matt Luke whatever he wants in Clemson, South Carolina. So it was really unfortunate that Jay Haynes, outside of the general unfortunates of being hurt, Jay Haynes went down and he served as Clemson's backup running back. A lot of fans were really pushing for him to get snaps as the year went on, noticing that Maffa was slowing up and realizing that, hey, who's the second guy? Why is Clemson not turning to a second guy? It felt like very much moments in the Pitt game in the Louisville game, where Clemson couldn't establish something with Maffa. Hey, why are we not turning to somebody else? Most teams even have a stronger rotation. Clemson used to run a pretty steady rotation, and they weren't. They were just rolling with Maffa or simply not running the ball. I think it's a little bit of gut check time for Clemson and running back coach C.J. Spiller and Dabo Swinney and Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator, to go, okay, we can trot Maffa out there knowing it's not going to work. As much as he's going to fight hard and do everything he can, doesn't have it right now, and that's okay. That's right. It's nothing against Phil Maffa. Just doesn't seem the best path forward. And it would have been Jay Haynes, and perhaps he'll be available. My hunch is that he will not be available against Texas. So then you're down to 3 and 4, and honestly, it's probably 3, 4, and 5 for Clemson. They have a guy named David Eziamume, who is a true freshman, and he's going to be redshirted this year, but now in the postseason, you don't have to worry about the redshirt. He's a 4-star guy. All signs would point to, hey, we're in the playoffs, why would we not give this guy, right, a lot of shares of the rock? Now, if you don't think he's ready, if you think he's going to fumble it, you got problems, but then it makes me wonder, what have we been doing for a year to not have this guy ready, particularly a 4-star guy that seems to be of real talent? If it's not him, it's probably going to be Keith Adams and Jarvis Green, or a combo of the two. Jarvis Green seems to be kind of like a Swiss Army knife kind of guy. Can run between the tackles, get outside the tackles, all those things. And then Keith Adams, they call him Hammerhead, and that's because he just runs really hard right into who's in front of him. I don't think this will work at all against Texas. If you got a 3rd and 1, maybe. But I would be extremely worried about this if I'm a Clemson fan. The way that Georgia beat Texas has nothing to do with Carson Beck or Gunnar Stockton figuring it out. It has nothing to do with generating big plays in the passing game like Georgia did against Clemson. It's purely they opened up running lanes, and I'll talk about where. That's imperative number 5. But imperative number 4 is they had a guy named Trevor Etienne. And I don't think Clemson has this guy. And so that's why my hunch is, why would you not let Eziamume show you what he's got? If you know that Keith Adams, as much as he is a good short yardage runner, is not going to provide you something, you got to take a stab. Because if you don't have a run game against Texas, I don't think you have any chance. I really don't. If Clemson and K. Klubnik win the game throwing 50 times, I will be tremendously surprised and impressed, because no team has displayed any ability to do that all year. Imperative number 5. Garrett Riley seems pretty smart, although at times Clemson's offense falls into such a tremendous rut that it's insane. Lots of macro thoughts on that at another time. Watching Texas's defensive tape, they're vulnerable to runs outside the tackles. Very hard to run in between the tackles on them, is what I keep noticing. But you can sweep it on them a little bit. Now, this is not a strength of Clemson's, particularly because of Phil Maffa's skill set, and that they really don't have a running back two. And once one sort of started to be developed in Jay Haynes, he's now, of course, injured. What we've seen Clemson be successful with is a lot of counter in the run game. I don't think that works super great against Texas, although I do think misdirection is necessary on short yardage. I don't think Clemson can just go man on man. I don't think the tight ends and wide receivers can handle that. Even though Clemson's fine in those spots, I think Texas is so strong that you have to deceive them in some way to get 1 or 2 yards. But if they could figure it out, if they could say, all right, Easy E, the freshman running back, if we can get him on the edge, we got something. I do think that's there. I noticed that within watching tape for an hour of a bunch of their games. Sweeps are available. Oklahoma had success with it. Georgia with Etienne had success with it. That is an option. Okay, last one. When it does come to the pass game, we've seen bad quarterback play beat Texas and Carson Beck in the first game they played. Carson Beck did not look good. Gunnar Stockton did not look good after the first prescripted drive. When he came in, Georgia beat Texas both times without tremendous quarterback play. I think Clemson, because of their inability to run the ball, will require tremendous quarterback play. And here's what I mean exactly for Cade Klubnik. This is the last imperative. And it's mixed with another thing is Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik have to be tremendous as a combo. And what I mean is when they time up that QB draw on 2nd and 7, it's got to pop. When Klubnik has a guy open on a slant, he can't miss. He's missed some throws the last couple weeks that Clemson would really like to have back. Despite making tremendous throws in those games, he's been a little bit streaky. And I don't even mean that in the negative sense that lots of folks seem to mean it when they talk about him. I think he gets a bad rap sometimes. He seems to either be tremendously on or the misses are just barely off. It's not falling off a wagon. He really never causes Clemson major issues. He does not always cash every opportunity, and I think in a game against Texas, which will be in his hometown, he went to Westlake High School, one of the best quarterback prospects to ever come out of Texas. I hope he's comfortable because of that, if you're a Clemson fan. You need Garrett Riley to have a few tricks up his sleeves to steal some points. I think you're going to need to steal points, and I think you're going to need Cade Klubnik to not do anything silly. Avoid turnovers and just hit the easy stuff. He's got to hit the easy stuff. Is the easiest way to put it. Got to hit the easy stuff. If I had to put a number on it, my hunch is that Clemson has not been particularly strong in second halves, although they've been very strong in first quarters. I think you could see a first half that's within one score, and then I would imagine Texas pulls away as the game goes on. I think that is the most likely outcome. If Clemson hits on half of these imperatives, maybe 4 of the 5, right, then I can see a world where this is a close game in the fourth quarter, and if you're Dabo Swinney and Clemson going into Austin, Texas, I think that is a tremendous win. What we've seen the last few weeks from Clemson, even going back to the Louisville game, is honestly, even going back to the Georgia game and maybe the past few years, is Clemson's inability to get out of its own way. I hate to be the Debbie Downer. I don't know why we would have evidence to believe that that will change when the opponent is as strong as Texas. That being said, Clemson does seem to be improving the last few weeks. The defense got better against Pitt, and then outside of broken tackles and Lenora Sellers being stupendous, the defense was better against South Carolina for a lot of the game. And the defense for a good amount of the SMU game was much stronger than it's been. Dabo Swinney brought it up immediately after the game, frustrated in one sense that they still haven't put together 4 quarters, but kind of excited that they haven't put together 4 quarters yet. Because if they could, I think they could probably play with anyone. So, if you're a betting man, betting woman, the money is with Texas. They have so many ways to win. And I think there's an Arch Manning element to this game that Sark could really lean into if he wants. That being said, Texas has developed a run game as the year has gone on that seems to be mildly effective, and Clemson is vulnerable against the run. And if I'm Texas, I would say, hey, Clemson, prove that you can stop the run, and if you can, then we got a game. And I don't know if Clemson's up for that, and we'll see. But what a cool game, right? Dabo Swinney and Clemson, who were a mainstay of college football in the 2010s, kind of an older Titan, now trying to hold off Sarkisian and a resurging Texas. It's a really cool game, and regardless of the outcome, I think will be a tremendous matchup.